The Onyx Lounge at Incheon International Airport smelled of three things: recycled air, expensive leather, and quiet desperation. For Zora, standing ramrod straight by the service station, it mostly smelled like survival. The air, filtered to clinical perfection, carried the ghost of jet fuel and the promise of departure, a promise not meant for her. The leather on the club chairs was Italian, a deep oxblood that sighed under the weight of men whose watches could fund a hospital wing. And the desperation was her own, a low, steady hum beneath the polished surface of her composure. She ran a microfiber cloth over the spotless chrome of a coffee machine, her movements economical, invisible. It was an art she had perfected, to exist in a space without occupying it. Her skin, the color of rich soil after a long rain, her hair, a constellation of tight coils pulled back so severely it made her temples ache. Her uniform, a crisp but ill-fitting charcoal gray. It was all camouflage. She was a fixture, a part of the lounge's hushed, expensive machinery. Her hands, long-fingered and capable, were the only things that felt like her own. They had once typed out classified diplomatic cables, translated sensitive negotiations, and learned to break down and reassemble a Glock 26 in under 30 seconds. Now, they wiped away the condensation rings of strangers. Her eyes, watchful and intelligent, scanned the room, cataloging exits, assessing threats, a habit she couldn't break. They saw everything. They were trained to. The hum of her desperation had a number: $28,450. That was the cost of the next cycle of her grandmother's experimental immunotherapy. A figure she recited internally like a rosary, each bead a sacrifice. For that number, she would be invisible. She would be deferential. She would swallow pride like crushed glass, because her grandmother's soft laughter was worth more than any pride she possessed. This lounge, this job, this slow-motion erasure of the woman she used to be, it was all for that laughter. It was a strategic retreat, not a surrender. She had been an analyst for the State Department, specializing in East Asian economic crime, a rising star until a political betrayal had shattered her career and left her blacklisted. Her foster father, a disgraced but once powerful figure in Busan's underworld, had taught her his language, his culture, his ruthlessness. He had armed her with knowledge that was now useless, a sword she had to keep sheathed while she served canapes. A tremor of anxiety disturbed the lounge's placid atmosphere. Mr. Kim, the lounge manager, scurried from the entrance, his face slick with sweat. He moved like a frightened mouse, his eyes darting towards the corner booth, the one perpetually reserved. "Attention!" he hissed to the staff, his voice a strained whisper. "Choi Min-jun is arriving. He is meeting with the guest." He didn't need to say the name. Everyone knew who the guest was. Kwon Jin-woo. The name settled over the room like a drop in barometric pressure. Jin-woo was already there, a fixed point of immense gravity in the corner booth. He hadn't entered. He had simply materialized, flanked by two men who stood like granite sentinels near the edge of his sanctum. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They simply were. The room oriented itself around him. Conversations were pitched lower. Laughter died in the throat. Kwon Jin-woo was not a businessman in the traditional sense. He was the head of the Golden Dragon Syndicate, a man whose empire was built on shadows and whispers. He wore a suit tailored with surgical precision, a dark charcoal that seemed to absorb the light. On his wrist was a Patek Philippe, its face a clean, merciless slate of platinum and sapphire. Zora had priced it once, out of professional curiosity. It was worth 6 cycles of her grandmother's treatment. His hair was black, sharp. His face was a mask of cold, handsome indifference. But his eyes were the last thing you noticed, and the first thing that warned you. They were chips of obsidian, calculating, still, and utterly devoid of warmth. He was examining a document, ignoring the world he so thoroughly dominated. Zora felt the familiar coil of professional assessment. Kwon was old guard Jopak, a world she understood intimately from her foster father. Power expressed through stillness, authority that required no volume. He was dangerous in a way the loud men who frequented this lounge could never comprehend. The doors slid open with a soft whoosh, admitting Choi Min-jun. He was everything Kwon Jin-woo was not: loud, performative. He swaggered into the room, his suit a shade too shiny, his cologne a chemical assault. He was the heir to a vast construction and shipping empire, a chaebol princeling whose cruelty was as legendary as his father's wealth. He was trying to broker a deal with Kwan's organization, seeking to use their logistics network for something. Zora's analyst brain clicked on. Something illicit. The Choys were dirty. She knew the names of their shell corporations by heart. Min-jun spotted Jin-woo and pasted on a wide, obsequious smile. He strode towards the corner booth, his own 2 bodyguards trailing him like well-dressed hyenas. Jin-woo Hyung-nim, Min-jun's voice boomed, shattering the lounge's reverent quiet. He bowed, a little too deep, a little too eager. Kwan Jin-woo did not look up from his papers for a full 10 seconds. The silence stretched, thin and agonizing. It was a calculated display of dominance, a lesson in hierarchy. Finally, he lifted his eyes. They held no welcome. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. Min-jun-si. His voice was low, a gravelly murmur that still carried across the room. Min-jun, flustered by the cold reception, needed to re-establish his own importance. His eyes scanned the room for a target, a prop for his performance. They landed on Zora. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He was trying to impress Jin-woo, to show he was a man of power who could command and debase others at will. She was the perfect victim, a foreigner, a servant, a black woman, an object. He snapped his fingers, a sound like a whip crack in the quiet room. You, waitress. Zora's mask of serene neutrality did not slip. She turned, inclining her head slightly. Yes, sir? Her voice was level, deferential, the voice of a ghost. Tea, he commanded, settling into the chair opposite Jin-woo. Barley, and make it hot. Not this lukewarm water you serve to tourists. He switched to Korean, his tone dripping with contempt, assuming she wouldn't understand a word. It was a common tactic, a way to create an exclusive space of power, to render her an uncomprehending piece of furniture. Can you believe they let these dark things work here? He said to Jin-woo, a conspiratorial smirk on his face. It lowers the whole tone of the place. They should be cleaning toilets, not serving people like us. Kwan Jin-woo's expression remained unchanged. He gave no sign he had even heard. His stillness was its own form of judgment. But Min-jun was too thick-headed to read it. He saw only a captive audience. Zora felt the familiar sting. The casual racism was a daily tax on her existence. She absorbed it, converted it into another dollar toward the $28,450. She retrieved the barley tea, her hands steady, her movements fluid. She placed the delicate porcelain cup on the table with practiced care. Min-jun watched her, his eyes narrowed. He was enjoying this. He let her pull her hand back before he moved, his motion a lazy, deliberate swipe. He backhanded the cup. Hot liquid splashed across the table and onto Zora's hand. Pain, sharp and searing, shot up her arm. She didn't flinch. She didn't make a sound. She stood perfectly still as the scalding tea dripped from her fingers onto the polished floor. The world seemed to slow down. She could feel the burn beginning to blister the back of her hand. She could see the smirking satisfaction on Min-jun's face. She could see the other patrons in the lounge suddenly finding their phones, or the view out the window intensely interesting. She saw Mr. Kim begin to scuttle forward, not to help her, but to apologize to Min-jun. And she saw Kwan Jin-woo. He had finally looked up. His cold, dark eyes were fixed not on Min-jun, but on her hand, on the rigid control in her posture. He was watching, observing, assessing. Clumsy bitch, Min-jun sneered in English for effect. He laughed, a short, ugly bark. He wanted a reaction. He needed her to cry, to crumble, to validate his power. Zora gave him nothing. Inside her, a clock was ticking. 3 seconds. The pain was a white-hot nova on her skin. 2 seconds. The image of her grandmother, frail but smiling in her hospital bed, flashed behind her eyes. 1 second, the number, $28,450. It had always been enough. But in that 1 second, a new calculation took hold. The cost of dignity. The price of silence. The bill for her own soul was coming due. Min-jun's frustration grew at her stoicism. He needed more. He reached out and grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging into the tender flesh above her burned hand. The pain was excruciating. His grip was tight, a vice of casual cruelty. I said, "Clean it up," he snarled, twisting her arm. "Are you deaf as well as stupid?" This was the line, the physical violation, the assertion of ownership, the absolute certainty in his eyes that she was nothing, that he could do anything to her and there would be no consequences. And that was when the first voice spoke. It was not loud, it was barely more than a whisper, a soft, silken sound that somehow cut through every other noise in the lounge, through the hum of the air conditioning, through the frantic beating of Zora's own heart. Touch her again. The entire lounge went silent, not quiet, silent. It was the absolute breathless silence of a forest when a predator is near. Every head turned, every conversation stopped. Quan Jinwoo had not moved from his seat. His hands were resting on the table, but his eyes were locked on Minjun's hand, the one crushing Zora's wrist. There was no anger in his expression. There was something far worse. A cold, flat, lethal promise. Choi Minjun froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, mottled gray. He looked from Jinwoo's face to his own hand on Zora's wrist as if it belonged to someone else. But before he could let go, before Jinwoo could even rise, Zora acted. The decision had been made in that final silent second. The calculation had changed. Survival was no longer enough. She looked directly at Choi Minjun, her eyes clear and steady, and she spoke. Her voice was not the deferential murmur of a waitress. It was calm, controlled, and laced with ice. And it was in Korean, not the clean, standard Seoul dialect of a student. It was the rough, nuanced, musical Satori of Busan's docks, the language of old men who had seen too much and old loyalties that ran deeper than blood. It was the language of her foster father, the language of Kwon Jinwoo's world. Choi Min-jun si, she said, her pronunciation perfect, her cadence authentic. Your father, the great Chairman Choi, would be ashamed to see his heir acting like a common dog in a public place. The shock in the room was a physical force. It was as if a statue had just spoken. Choi Min-jun stared at her, his mouth hanging open. His grip on her wrist went slack. Mr. Kim, who had been halfway to the table, stopped so abruptly he nearly fell over. Even Jinwoo's two stone-faced guards shifted their weight, their eyes wide. Zora slowly, deliberately, pulled her wrist from Minjun's limp grasp. She straightened her spine. It was a small movement, but it felt monumental. The subservient slump of the waitress fell away, replaced by the rigid posture of an analyst, a soldier. She was no longer hiding. She met Minjun's stunned, idiotic gaze and held it. The power in the space had fractured, and something new, something dangerous, was flowing into the cracks. Who the hell are you?" Minjun stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. He tried to reclaim his bluster, but it was like a wet firecracker. "How do you—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The reality was too jarring. This black woman, this servant, had not only understood his insults, she had replied with a cultural and linguistic precision that was a weapon in itself. She had called him a dog in the dialect of the very men he was trying to emulate. Zora allowed herself a small, cold smile. It didn't touch her eyes. "Just a waitress with good ears," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the silent room. She took a small step closer to him, invading his space. And a memory for the names of shell corporations, like Tidal Holdings Group in Macau, or Pan-Pacific Ventures in the Caymans, the ones your family uses to wash money for your North Korean partners. Mick. Drop. The name North Korea hung in the air like poison gas. Choi Min-jun's face went from pale to corpse white. This wasn't just an insult anymore. This was an execution. Kwon Jinwoo finally moved. He rose from his seat, not with speed, but with a deliberate, lethal grace. He walked around the table and stood beside Zora. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at Minjun. He looked at his own men. He gave a single sharp nod. They moved. It was over in seconds. Minjun and his bodyguards were hauled to their feet, and Frog marched out of the lounge without a sound. They didn't fight. You didn't fight Kwon Jinwoo's men. The lounge remained frozen in a state of collective shock. Jinwoo turned his attention to the trembling Mr. Kim. "A private room," he commanded. His voice was quiet, but it held the absolute authority of a king. Then, his dark eyes finally settled on Zora. He looked at her burned hand, now an angry, blistering red. His gaze softened by a fraction of a degree, a change so subtle only someone trained to read micro-expressions would notice. And a first aid kit, now. The private conference room was as sterile and silent as the rest of the lounge, but now the silence felt different. It was the quiet of a sealed chamber, a place where worlds could shift. Zora sat in a leather chair, her back straight, ignoring the throbbing pain in her hand. A doctor, summoned from the airport's medical clinic with impossible speed, was gently applying a cooling burn salve and wrapping her hand in white gauze. Zora endured the treatment with the same stillness she had shown earlier. Quan Jin-woo stood by the window, looking out at the planes taxiing on the runway. He hadn't spoken since they'd entered the room. The doctor finished his work, bowed low to Jin-woo, and scurried out, leaving them alone. The silence stretched. It was not the oppressive silence of the lounge, but something else. A space for assessment. A negotiation without words. Zora knew what was happening. He was evaluating her. She had gone from being furniture to being an anomaly. A potentially valuable, potentially dangerous asset. Finally, he turned from the window. He walked over and placed a black credit card on the table in front of her. It had no name, only a sequence of numbers and the seal of a private Swiss bank. "Your grandmother's medical care," he said. His voice was flat, declarative. "It is covered, for as long as is necessary." Zora looked at the card, then back at him. Her expression was unreadable. This was the first test. Was she a victim to be bought? A problem to be paid off? "I am not a charity case, Quan Jin-woo si," she replied, her voice as level as his. A flicker of something, respect, surprise, passed through his cold eyes. "I am aware. This is not charity. It is a retainer." "A retainer for what?" "Information," he said simply. "You know things that are of value to me. The name you mentioned, North Korea. That is a dangerous game the Choi family is playing. It brings unwanted attention. It is bad for business." "And you want me to be your analyst," Zora stated. It wasn't a question. "I want you to be what you already are," he corrected. "You are clearly more than a waitress. You have training, the way you stand, the way you watch, and your Korean, the Busan dialect, is not something a foreigner learns in a classroom. Who are you?" Here was the trade, her story for his resources, her expertise for his protection. It was a deal, not a rescue. She was not a damsel. She was a professional with a unique and valuable skill set. "My foster father was Park Min-soo," she said. Jinwoo's stillness broke for a fraction of a second. A muscle in his jaw clenched. He knew the name. Everyone in their world knew the name. Park Min-soo had been a legend, a brilliant strategist for the old Busan syndicate before a betrayal had forced him into exile. "Old man Park," Jinwoo said, his voice laced with a new, deeper respect. "He disappeared years ago. We thought he was dead." "He raised me in America," Zora explained, offering only the necessary facts. "He taught me. I refined that education with the U.S. government. Until my government decided I was disposable. And now? Now I have a grandmother to take care of," Zora said, her voice hardening. "And I have an enemy. Choi Min-jun tried to humiliate me. He tried to break me. He put his hands on me. For that, he needs to be erased." Jinwoo studied her for a long moment. He saw the fire in her eyes, the steel in her spine. He saw the analyst's mind working behind the calm facade. He saw a reflection of the same cold, controlled fury that lived inside him. This was not an asset. This was an ally, a weapon. "The Choi family has deep roots," he warned. "Destroying them will not be simple." "Nothing worth doing ever is," Zora countered. She looked at the black card on the table. She didn't pick it up. "I don't work on retainer Kwon-si. I work as a partner. I will give you the intelligence and the strategy to dismantle the Choi Empire from the inside out. In return, you will provide the infrastructure, the protection for my grandmother, and when the time comes, the platform for me to deliver the final blow myself." She was negotiating, with him, the head of the Golden Dragon Syndicate. It was audacious. It was suicide. A slow, rare smile touched Kwon Jinwoo's lips. It was a chilling sight, like seeing a glacier crack. It did not reach his eyes, but it changed the entire climate of the room. A partnership, then, he agreed. He pushed the credit card closer to her. For operational expenses. This time, Zora picked it up. The cool, heavy plastic felt like a key, like a trigger. The invisible woman was gone. Zora was back. And she was going to war. The war began not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of a server farm. Jin Woo installed Zora in a penthouse suite overlooking the Han River, a gilded cage that was also a fortress. It was a world of polished marble, silent elevators, and floor-to-ceiling windows that displayed Seoul as a glittering carpet of possibilities. But for Zora, the true luxury was the bank of monitors and encrypted hard drives that now formed her command center. This was her element. Data streams, financial records, shipping manifests, satellite imagery. It was a language she spoke as fluently as Korean. She worked with a relentless, focused intensity. Jin Woo's network gave her access, backdoors into systems that would have taken her months to crack on her own. She was a shark let loose in an ocean of data, and she was hunting. The picture she pieced together was far uglier than she had imagined. The Choi weren't just laundering money. They were a key node in a human trafficking network, moving desperate North Korean refugees into forced labor situations across Southeast Asia. The shipping company was the artery, pumping human misery around the globe for immense profit. Her blood ran cold as she stared at the files. This wasn't about corporate greed anymore. This was about saving lives. Her personal vendetta against Min Jun was now subsumed by a far greater purpose. One evening, Zora identified a critical weak point, a small, unassuming logistics office at the port of Busan that processed the falsified manifests for the trafficking ships. The data was firewalled, locally stored. She needed physical access. "I'll send a team," Jin Woo said over their encrypted line. He was a constant, steady presence, a voice in her ear, a shadow ensuring her safety. "No," Zora countered immediately. "A team is loud. They'll be looking for your men. They won't be looking for me." "It's too dangerous, Zora, see? I've run more dangerous solo infiltrations in my previous life," she stated calmly. "I know the port. My father taught me every smuggling route, every corrupt harbor master. I speak the language. I can walk in there as a disgruntled shipping clerk and walk out with their entire server copied. Your men can provide overwatch and exfil, but I'm going in alone." There was a long silence on the line. She was overruling him, dictating operational terms. She waited, her heart steady. This was a test of their partnership. Was she truly an equal, or just a high-level employee? "Provide her with whatever she needs," Jin Woo's voice finally came back, speaking to someone else. Then to her, "Your plan, your operation. Do not get caught." 3 days later, Zora was in Busan. Dressed in the worn jacket of a port worker, a cheap beanie pulled over her hair, she looked like 1,000 other people hustling on the docks. She moved with a purpose that blended into the controlled chaos of the port. Her Busan dialect was her key, opening doors and placating suspicious guards. She navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the shipping office, a ghost in the machine, and in 15 minutes of quiet, breathtaking work, she cloned their server and walked out into the sea-swept air, the heart of the Choi operation, on a drive tucked into her pocket. It was a clean, perfect extraction. She had done it herself. The victory was short-lived. Choi Min-jun, humiliated and enraged, was not idle. Unable to strike at Zora directly, he went for her only vulnerability, her grandmother. The call came from one of Jin Woo's men stationed at the hospital. "There's a problem. A police unit is on its way. Tip off about narcotics in your grandmother's room." Ice flooded Zora's veins. It was a classic dirty move. Plant drugs, call in a corrupt cop, and suddenly her grandmother is a felon, her medical care revoked, her life in jeopardy. "Stop them," Zora ordered Jin Woo over the comms, her voice deadly quiet. "My men are moving," he assured her. "They will not reach her room." "That's not enough," Zora snapped. "This can't be a gangland shootout in a hospital. We have to cut it off legally." She was already typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling up files on the Seoul Metropolitan Police Department. She found the name of the lead detective on the raid unit. She cross-referenced it with records of internal affairs investigations, financial disclosures, known associates. In 90 seconds, she had her weapon. Jinwoo's men, dressed as hospital orderlies, intercepted the police team in the hallway, blocking their path with gurneys. But it was Zora's voice, patched through on the lead detective's personal cell phone, that stopped the raid cold. "Detective Lee?" Her voice was calm, conversational, but carried the weight of absolute authority. "This is a courtesy call. I suggest you and your men turn around. The warrant you're serving is based on a false tip, and executing it would be a severe career misstep." "Who is this?" the detective blustered. "Let's just say I'm a friend of Judge Song," Zora said, dropping the name of a senior judge known for his incorruptibility. "And I'm also aware of the undocumented payments you've been receiving from a subsidiary of Choi Construction, the ones that paid for your son's tuition at Oxford. It would be a shame if the National Tax Service and the Inspector General's office were to receive an anonymous file detailing that arrangement. Turn around, detective. Go home." The line went silent. Then, a click. On the hospital's security feed, Zora watched Detective Lee bark an order. The police unit turned and left. The threat was neutralized, not with bullets, but with information, with her skill. That night, Jinwoo came to her suite. He found her staring out at the city lights, a glass of whiskey untouched in her hand. "Your grandmother is safe," he said. "I have moved her to a private, secure facility. No one will get near her again." "He went after my family," Zora whispered, the first crack in her iron control. "He crossed the line." "Yes," Jinwoo agreed. "He did." He stood beside her, not touching, but his presence was a solid, reassuring weight in the room. "I have a plan, a strike on their main warehouse. We will hit them hard, cripple their distribution." Zora turned from the window to face him. "No." He raised an eyebrow. "No?" "That's your way, Jinwoo Si," she said, her voice regaining its strength. "Violence for violence. It's messy. It's loud. It leaves witnesses and draws the kind of official attention we don't want. The Chois are a corporation as much as a criminal enterprise. You don't kill a beast like that by cutting off a limb. You poison its heart." She turned to her monitors, her face illuminated by the glow of the screens. "I have everything. The trafficking routes, the falsified manifests, the money laundering trails, the names of the corrupt officials they have on their payroll. We don't hit their warehouse. We hit their stock price. We trigger simultaneous investigations in every jurisdiction they operate in, the US, Macau, Singapore. We leak the trafficking information to an international human rights group. We freeze their assets, destroy their reputation, and turn their partners against them. We'll have their entire empire dismantled in 72 hours, without firing a single shot." Jinwoo stared at her, at the fierce intelligence burning in her eyes. She wasn't just an analyst providing data for his plans. She was a strategist, a general. She saw the battlefield in a way he didn't. His way was the sword. Hers was the scalpel, the poison, the intricate trap. He had come to offer a plan. He was leaving with a better one, hers. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, the deference of one apex predator to another. "It will be your plan." The final piece of the puzzle required a face-to-face meeting. A rival faction, hearing whispers of the Choi family's instability, had requested a meeting with Jinwoo. It was a potential alliance, a necessary evil to ensure that when the Choi Empire fell, the resulting power vacuum didn't erupt into open war. They met in the neutral territory of a private dining room in a high-end hotel. Zora was there, ostensibly as a translator, though her role was to observe, to analyze the new players. The meeting was tense. The leader of the rival faction, a man named Snakehead, was volatile and ambitious. He postured and threatened, testing Jinwoo's resolve. "You strike at the Chois. You start a war that will burn this city down," Snakehead hissed, leaning across the table. "The Chois are a disease," Jinwoo replied, his voice a low rumble. "I am the cure." Zora saw it first. A flicker of movement in the reflection on the polished surface of a silver serving dome behind Jinwoo. A waiter, his face a mask of grim determination, was pulling a ceramic knife from his sleeve. An assassin. He was too close. Jinwoo was focused on Snakehead. He wouldn't see it in time. There was no time to think, no time to shout a warning. Zora moved. In a single fluid motion, she launched herself from her chair, shoving Jinwoo hard. Her shoulder slammed into his, sending him staggering sideways, out of the path of the blade. The assassin's lunge, meant for Jinwoo's throat, was thrown off balance. The ceramic blade slashed downwards, catching Zora on the forearm as she fell. Pain, sharp and clean, ripped through her arm. The room exploded. Jinwoo's men neutralized the assassin in a blur of brutal efficiency. Snakehead and his crew looked on, stunned. Zora lay on the floor, clutching her bleeding arm. Jinwoo was at her side in an instant. He ripped a strip from the fine linen tablecloth and pressed it against the wound, his touch firm, his face a mask of cold fury. But his eyes, when they met hers, held something else, something raw and unguarded. It was the second time she had been hurt in his presence. The first time, he had been a protector. This time, she had been his. The protection, the loyalty, it flowed both ways. He lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. "The meeting is over," he announced to the room, his voice deathly calm. He carried her out, leaving a stunned silence and the clear, unspoken message. This woman was his. To harm her was to harm him. And the consequences for that would be absolute. The trap was Zora's design, a masterpiece of financial and political warfare. At 9 a.m. Seoul time, on a Tuesday, she pressed a single key on her laptop. An avalanche began. Anonymous, encrypted files reached the desks of prosecutors in the U.S., Department of Justice, financial regulators in Singapore, and anti-corruption officials in Macau. Simultaneously, a detailed report on the Choi family's human trafficking operations, complete with names, dates, and routes, was leaked to a renowned international journalist. By noon, Choi shipping stock was in freefall. By 2 p.m., their international assets were frozen by court order. By 4 p.m., Chairman Choi had suffered a massive, stress-induced heart attack. By sunset, the Choi Empire, a dynasty that had stood for 50 years, was a smoking crater. It was a corporate assassination, executed with surgical precision. The final confrontation was not in a boardroom filled with lawyers, but in the heart of the fallen kingdom. The Choi family's corporate headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel in Gangnam, was now a ghost building, seized by the government. Kwon Jinwoo's influence had secured them access for 1 hour. Zora walked through the cavernous marble-floored lobby. She was not wearing a uniform. She wore a bespoke silk pantsuit the color of midnight, tailored to fit her perfectly. Her hair was styled in a crown of intricate braids. The white bandage on her forearm was the only hint of the violence that had brought her here. She walked with the unhurried confidence of a queen taking possession of a conquered castle. Jinwoo and 2 of his men followed, silent and watchful, a predator's shadow. They took the private elevator to the top floor. The chairman's office was a monument to ego, with a desk the size of a small car and a panoramic view of the city. Zora walked past the desk and sat in the chairman's high-backed leather chair. She swiveled to face the view. The city spread at her feet. This was a perspective of power she had only ever seen from the other side of the glass, while cleaning it. The doors opened. Choi Min-jun was dragged in by 2 of Jinwoo's men. He was a wreck. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face unshaven, his eyes wild with disbelief and terror. They threw him onto the floor in front of the desk. He scrambled to his knees, looking up, and he saw her. The recognition was slow, a dawning horror that contorted his features. He saw the face of the invisible waitress, the black woman he had humiliated, now sitting in his father's seat of power, cloaked in an aura of absolute authority. "You," he whispered, the word a ragged gasp. "It was you. Hello, Min-jun-si." Zora's voice was calm, conversational. She swiveled the chair to face him fully. "We meet again." He started to babble, the desperate, incoherent pleas of a man with nothing left. He offered money he no longer had. He made threats that were now empty. He begged for a mercy he had never shown another living soul. Zora listened, her expression impassive. When he finally ran out of words, dissolving into pathetic sobs, she leaned forward. She picked up a delicate Celadon porcelain teacup from the corner of the desk, identical to the one he had spilled on her in the airport lounge. She held it in her hands, her long fingers tracing its smooth, cool rim. Her bandaged arm rested on the polished wood of the desk. "You were right about one thing, all those weeks ago," she said, her voice soft. "Place matters. It's important to know yours." He looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Was she going to let him go? She did not spill the tea. She did not throw it. She set it down with perfect, deliberate care back on the desk. A quiet click in the silent room. "This," she said, gesturing to the office, the city, the ruins of his life, "is my place now." His face crumpled. He finally understood. This wasn't about money or business. It was about justice. It was a reckoning. "But my family's final destruction won't be financial," she continued, her voice turning to ice. "That's too clean, too impersonal." She slid a single thin file across the vast desk. It stopped just before him. "Your father didn't have a heart attack, Min-jun. He took his own life. And that file is the reason why. It's the original adoption record for the son he had with his mistress 30 years ago. The son he abandoned but secretly funded. The son who, it turns out, is a brilliant and ruthless executive at your biggest rival company. The son who, according to your father's original will, is the sole heir to what little is left of his personal fortune. You are not just ruined, Min-jun. You have been replaced, erased from your own story." It was the final, most devastating blow. A secret she had unearthed, a truth that severed the very root of his identity. It was a visceral, personal destruction that no amount of money could ever fix. It was justice, delivered not by a court, but by her hand. Choi Min-jun made a sound, a thin, wounded animal keen. He had been stripped of everything. His money, his power, his name, his very place in the world. He was now the invisible one. Zora rose from the chair. She didn't look at him again. Her work was done. As she walked past him, Kwon Jin-woo fell into step beside her. The authorities could have the body. She had taken the soul. 6 months later, the air at the port of Busan smelled of salt, diesel, and commerce. Zora stood on the deck of a container ship, a tablet in her hand, her expression focused. She wore practical, expensive outerwear against the wind, her hair braided back. She was giving a rapid-fire series of orders in flawless Korean to a burly port supervisor, pointing out discrepancies in a loading schedule. He listened with rapt, respectful attention. This was her domain now. She was the chief operating officer of Golden Dragon Logistics, the new legitimate face of Kwon Jin-woo's vast enterprise. She hadn't just been given a title, she had built the company from the ground up, using her expertise to turn shadowy routes into profitable, legal trade channels. Her phone buzzed. She answered, a warm, genuine smile transforming her face. "Hi, Grandma." Her grandmother's voice, strong and full of laughter, came through the line. "I'm looking at the roses you sent, baby girl. They're beautiful. Are you eating properly?" Zora looked out at the sea, at the endless horizon. "I'm eating just fine, Grandma Rose, and I'll be home this weekend." Her grandmother was in remission, living in a beautiful house by the sea, with a garden and a full-time nurse. The black credit card sat in a drawer, unused. Zora's salary more than covered everything. Later that evening, she stood with Jin-woo on the balcony of his Busan villa, overlooking the twinkling lights of the city and the dark expanse of the water. They were quiet for a long time, a comfortable silence born of shared battles and mutual understanding. He handed her a folder. Inside were the deeds and incorporation papers for a new global security and risk analysis firm. Her name was listed as president and CEO. "A new venture," he said. It wasn't a gift. It was a new partnership, a new world to conquer together, as she accepted the folder. "My work here isn't finished." "I know," he said. "This is for when it is." His gaze fell to the faint silvery scar that traced a line on her forearm, a permanent reminder of the night she had saved him. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His eyes, for a moment, lost their coldness, replaced by a deep, quiet reverence. It was the look of a man who saw her, all of her, the warrior, the analyst, the protector. That recognition was more intimate than any touch, more potent than any declaration. It was everything. He finally broke the silence, his voice a low murmur against the sound of the waves. "Some people mistake silence for weakness. They are always the first to fall." Zora looked from the scar on her arm to the powerful, silent man beside her. She had found her place, not in a lounge or an office, but in the space between two worlds, a space she had carved out for herself, with her mind, her courage, and her will. She was home. When dignity is all you have left, how much is it worth? What would you have done?